Attention has been commodified, and it's your most precious asset is your attention. So what you're paying attention to is biologically active and transforming you. So be careful about what you pay attention to.
Welcome, Gil. I'm so happy to see you.
Happy to see you too, Lane.
Thank you. Thank you. So you are just a man of so many accomplishments, and I want to get to those. But the first thing I would like to ask you about is you say that you're a lifelong student of personal and spiritual growth. How did that start? How did you get motivated in that direction?
So I was always captivated by the stories that I heard in church and took them seriously, and so wanted to live like that. Admired Jesus as an example of what humans could be like, and so I think that was just built in from my childhood. My mother told me that there's a little spark of God inside of you from when I was a little boy, and I thought, ooh, that's cool. I want to know more about that. So I think it's always been with me. I remember in high school, I was one of those kids walking around with like the four gospels in my back pocket of my overalls. I was very into it. I was into the youth groups at the church, and that was really my community. And when I went to college, it continued to be my community. All my friends were from the Catholic community at Duke, where I went to college. And so I don't know, I was reading when I was a freshman in high school. I took a class on world religions, learned about world religions, just was open. I was open. It didn't make any sense to me that a loving God would create people to send them to hell because they didn't hear the right message. And so I was very open to learning how do other people experience their spirituality and what brings them forward, as humans. As I don't know, it's always been my thing. It's just me.
So you are a doctor of theological ethics?
I guess. I mean, that's my. I haven't really run around trumpeting that title because I never went to, be a professor at a university. I was still in grad school when I took up um, Tai Chi and then acupressure massage. Then I went to the Rolf Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and learned massage. And then I did the Rolfing training. So there you go.
So you're a very religious person, but you're also open to other religions and to ethics and morals. How did you get interested in becoming, well, you got into Tai Chi for your own physical fitness?
Physical and mental fitness, because I was like this disembodied creature in grad school, as we all were, super hyper intellectual, very meta thinking, so I was not in my body at all. And I knew it was a problem. And I had to see if I could swim into this physical form. And so Tai Chi was my first step, I would say, in trying to become literally an embodied person rather than a disembodied person. So Tai Chi, really gave me some movement, some grounding, and also a little bit of community, because it's a lonely life in the stacks of the library. And so the Tai Chi Club was a great way to make some friends and around a shared interest in movement and the body. And so that was really my first foray into embodiment. And then I went to the Rolf Institute to study massage. I've got a bunch of massages, got Rolf. That was a little more step into embodiment.
Can you just explain what Rolfing is?
Sure. It's kind of falls into the category of bodywork modalities. So it's one form of bodywork. It's got a funny name because it's named after a lady who had a funny name. So Dr. Ida P. Rolf. And it's basically a bodywork modality where the emphasis is less on kind of pleasure and relaxation in the course of the session, in which case there may or may not be any pleasure or relaxation in terms of the style of touch, but it was more, it more had a goal or intention to help facilitate a person's, organization in space and the way that they move. So to give lasting changes to the structure so that a person could walk away from a series of sessions feeling more integrated, feeling more balanced, feeling more whole, maybe even feeling more mature at an ideal level. And then if things got resolved in terms of physical distress along the way, that was extra points,
So what other modalities did you become proficient in addition to Rolfing?
Well, before I could even train as a Rolfer, I had to learn massage. So I basically learned Swedish or Esalen style massage, Swedish Esalen at the Rolf Institute as a pre-training. Then I trained in the Rolfing, and then I went straight to the energy healing school where I met you.
What did you learn in the IM School of the Healing Arts, and then what did you walk away with from that 4-year school of study?
I got a lot from that school. I was deeply impressed over the course of those several years by the way in which we defend ourselves, the way in which we kind of fight our way through the world. And the way we do so with habitual patterns that could be uncovered and transcended. So learning like a whole set of different ways in which I defend, learning to identify the ways that I defend, and then learning to identify the way other folks may have patterns of defense, how we trigger each other's defenses, how that keeps us apart from each other, and then how also by learning to not be afraid of those defenses, but rather keeping settled in the presence of people in their defense, you could transcend both their defensiveness without being triggered, but also transcend your own defensiveness by realizing when you are triggered and not necessarily going into your defense, seeing it coming, right? Getting an advanced warning on your own foibles and less than perfect ways of communicating and engaging with people around you. So that gave me an incredible toolkit that I really took to heart, so that when I started working with groups, I could see defenses, see what triggered them, and help people to be in their own skin and not dissociating into old patterns, so that they could be present enough to grow and learn from what was being offered. So I never worked with that stuff explicitly, or I should say the couple times I tried to, it was a total disaster, and I realized that was not my way. Our teacher in that school was very provocative, right? He would sort of poke the hornet's nest just to get things going, so we could all witness everybody in flames. and then when you saw yourself in the defense and could identify it as that and not some rational response to the circumstances, but rather a quite irrational response to the circumstances. You could learn with that. But we had a container to hold that lasted for several days, and the 100% focus of the time was that. Whereas that wasn't the focus of my dissection classes. People came to learn anatomy. And so I always started with an hour in the morning, but not as a circle for psychodynamics, which is just not enough of a time frame, but just as an opportunity for people to say where they are, to give people a chance to be there as their whole selves, to be upset about something that they saw yesterday that scared them and gave them a bad dream, or something that they were afraid of that was going to happen that day. Because I do find that when people are vulnerable in that way, then other people are like, oh, I'm not alone here. I'm not the only one who's scared. Everyone was scared, or everyone thought that was scary or disgusting, And so then it's very community forming. And so instead of working directly with people's defense structures in a kind of head-to-head sort of way, I developed a much more subtle approach that could unfold during the course of a week in the class, so that people could still be having a transformational experience, even though that wasn't the sort of front and center obvious reason why people were coming to the class, which is to study anatomy through dissection. So it turns out that the cadaver itself provides an incredible mirror, for the people standing around it. And instead of being confronted by your teacher, putting you into a corner and getting you to flare up so we could all see your defenses, you don't need that. You've got a cadaver on the table. If that doesn't provoke you, nothing will. And then there's no direct conflict, and you can actually go pretty much quicker. People can, because people's defenses aren't up with respect to another person necessarily, you can actually make very quick progress with a person. They can come to new understandings of themselves and the people they're standing next to, and have a deeper appreciation for them without necessarily having to drag through everything your mother said to you.
At what point in your life, during all of these areas that you went into, did you start writing your poetry and your books?
Well, I kind of had a midlife crisis, basically. It was, not kind of. It was a full-on. it was a full-fledged, knockdown, drag-out midlife crisis that resulted whose fruits were an affair, a separation, a divorce, and a whole lot of poetry. I learned a lot from that, and I realized I'd come to kind of a stuck place in my life, and things needed to change. And so, I didn't take pride in being unfaithful to my wife at all. I was the guiltiest human being that's ever walked the planet. And had to, end my marriage. Sadly, it was a hard time certainly for my wife, and for me as well. I wouldn't wish divorce on my worst enemy. It is excruciating, painful pathway. That being said, I have so much more appreciation for people who've been through that, and also for the courage that it can take to work through the dissolution of a relationship that's so important to everyone involved. And so the poetry kind of came out of that, in two phases. One was, oh my gosh, there's a lot to life, and I feel like myself bubbling up inside with excitement for life. And then the crushing realization that that excitement and that bubbling up of life wasn't a match for the relationship that I was in. And so those were the two pulses of my initial waves of poetry that came out. And after then, so you have the pulse of life bubbling up within you, and then the crushing realization that it's going to cause your entire life to fall apart, and then the life does fall apart, and you are roiling in the excruciating pain of upending a life and everyone else's life, and feeling guilty and ashamed and angry and all those things, and then coming to terms with it all. And so those are the sort of pulses of the poetry that I've written and put into books. That I wrote a book called Coming Into Form. That was the first poetry book. That was the oh my gosh, there's life. And then the next one's called Beyond Believing, which is an attempt to deal with what happens when life bubbles up like that. And then the third one was called The Seeming Space. And that, instead of all being, the first two came in 6 months, all those poems. And then over the course of 10 years came, another pile, more slowly. And so that one was called The Seeming Space. And when I finally decided I would publish The Seeming Space, I just piled it all into one book, because I thought it's kind of mean to make people buy 3 poetry books from the same person. And I use very large type so that I could read it without my glasses on for myself. It was like a Dr. Seuss reader, the way I had printed it. And so I was like, let me take all the pictures out, all the blank pages, all the space, and I just jammed everything into one little book so that I could sell it for cheaper.
That book of poetry, The Seeming Space, was very moving for me. I mean, I know I've told you this before, but there are some poems in there that are so excruciatingly, extraordinarily beautiful and touching, and just reach inside your heart. I have never read poetry like that, other than Rumi, and your stuff. A certain section in that book totally reminded me of like I thought, Gil is Rumi reincarnated, isn't he? Because yeah.
That's very, very generous. And I can say that I had to write those poems. It was the weirdest thing. I was possessed. I had to write them. It wasn't like, I want to be a poet, I think I'll write poems. Let me read a book about poetry and then learn how to write poems. It was like, no, it was like my guts were being dragged out of me and through my hand, and I had to write them down. That's kind of how that went.
When did you start homeschooling your 3 children, and what was the reason that you wanted to do that?
Thing. I never anticipated having children or even getting married. I didn't know, whatever, I'm just a young man, and I always thought I was going to be a priest. And then when I decided I wasn't going to be a priest and that getting married would be a good idea, maybe, it occurred to me even that early on, I was like, but what if I had kids? If I had kids, I could never go to work. Like, I could never leave the house, because who would want to leave their kids behind, right? And that was like a thought that I had. And so when my kids were born, I was like, also I had like a pathological mistrust of the government. And so I thought, I want to be with my kids. I don't want to send them off to somebody else all day long. So it was just kind of a deep thing inside of me. And then when I did have kids, well, sure enough, I didn't want to send them away. And so I learned about homeschooling and different ways to approach that. I can, impress certain values upon them that I want to make sure they have. And then once I've done that, then they can go out into the world and hack their way along with everybody else. And so really all you have to do with kids for the first, I don't know, 15 years of their life is just encourage them in their interests, because all humans have interests. I don't think there's a human born who's not interested in something, even if it's just that ball across the room that you're crawling towards because it's red and you want to throw it at your sister. Whatever. Everyone has an interest, right? And when you have interests, kids will naturally want to learn things that support that interest. And so if you support them in the things they actually want to learn, they'll pick up things that are maybe not so interesting to them as well, but facilitates the larger or main essential interests that they have. And so that was kind of my approach. I did make sure they had some basic essentials that they could count to 10 in their head, and and that they knew that 2 + 8 would also get them to 10. And then I read to them forever. Like I read and read and read to my kids. And so they heard all kinds of stories, Aesop's fables, and when they were old enough, I read them harder things like Shakespeare and the Constitution, and the basic essentials of citizenship. I read to them Tintin and Asterix and Obelix. Like I bought every copy of those cartoons because I love them so much. And I grew up reading, Archie comics and Richie Rich in the 70s. So it's like, if I could turn into me from reading Archie, I thought then they can certainly turn into something better if I read them better comics. And so we read a lot of comics. And like Chris got interested. He's like, he got this thing called Horrible Histories. So we got it was 12 volumes of the history of the world. It turns out he has an almost eidetic memory, and so he just read them and then knew the history of the world. So, at least from the Horrible Histories vantage point. So, if they were interested in something, I made sure they could read it. Sarah read to me every page of all 7 of the Harry Potter books out loud with feeling. She read them out loud around the dining room table. And gave character voices to everybody in them. And it was fun and interesting. And we talked about it as we went. And then, at 16, Sarah was like, I want to go to school. I was like, okay, go. And so she entered high school as a sophomore and finished 3 years of public school. And then Chris, then I did 2 years with just Ian and Chris. And then he was like, yeah, I'm going to go to school too. I was like, great, have fun. I couldn't provide them, a 200 kid theater group that they had at the high school or an art department. So you just let your kids, whatever. If there's a flame, you just blow on it and they light up. And they did fine.
I bet you they did better than fine. I mean, did they find themselves to be kind of on the same par with the other kids that had gone through, the government school?
Oh, they were ahead of the game, actually.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous.
Good job.
So, all right. So talk about your school, this Institute for Anatomical Research in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Yeah. Oh, that's not my school. That is a wonderful nonprofit organization founded by a dear friend of mine, Bonnie Thompson, who studied with me over the years and thought, I'd like to have a lab of my own. And if I build it, maybe Gil will come. And so at the lab here, I was able to really dig in and bring in volunteers and do long-term massive projects that bring my work to a whole other level. So I teach at this place, and many other people do as well. who take advantage of the lab's policies and services and mission. And the lab has its own teaching agenda as well. I am the president of the board of the lab, but I don't like own the lab, and it's not my school. I'm more like the candy that brings in the bees or something like that. So folks who, I have some reputation after several decades, and so folks will, it's a great team effort on all of our parts to make the thing work. And so I do my big projects there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, heartfelt place.
Talk a little bit about your latest, most recent project, the Nerve Project.
That was a biggie. So, thinking about doing a demonstration of the whole nerve tree of an individual form for many years, for decades, because it had already been done and done well. In 1925, at Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, where a couple of medical students were noticed in the great skill with which they had dissected an arm, the nerves of an arm, and they were like, that is amazing, could you do that for the whole body? And they said, sure. And so these two students spent about 1,500 hours together in the lab and did a spectacular extraction of the nerve tree from a single donor. And that, to me, their work represents the most successful representation of the nerve tree that anyone has ever done and probably will ever do. But as an inspiration to me, I thought, oh, I'd love to give that a go someday, but document it along the way. And then a friend passed away and offered his body. When I spoke with his wife, my friend also, I said I could use him for a week-long class. I said, or I was thinking about doing this nerve project. And she immediately said, yeah, that one, use him for that. He would love that. And thus was born the Nerve Project. And I did spend that 5 months in the lab. And about 2 weeks after I was done, I had a keynote speech to deliver in Oklahoma City for a friend, my dear friend Eric Dalton, rest in peace. He just passed away a couple months ago. Eric was running this big conference with 250 people coming for 3 days, and he said, I want you to keynote this thing, and I'm going to give you 3 hours. What do you say? Whatever you want, And I'm like, do you mind if I talk about nerves? Because I'm going to be pretty deep into nerves by the time your conference rolls around. So I finished this project, and I hadn't made a talk yet. So in about 9 days, I just went through all these unlabeled folders and stuff and slapped the story together. So I brought it to the conference. I went over about a half an hour. I talked for like 3.5 hours. I had no idea how long it would take to deliver the pile of slides I had made. And at the end of it, everyone was crying and giving me a standing ovation. So I walked to the back of the room and I said to Rachel, I think more people should see this talk. This can't be a one-off. I think we should take it on the road. And she's just like, yeah, let's do it. I agree. And we picked all the cities and mapped out 111 city tour. And yeah, thousands and thousands of people came over the course of 15 months. It was quite an event.
It was an extraordinary experience. For 5 hours, I think I saw you up in Asheville.
Oh, yes, that's
and
right.
oh my God, edge of the seat. I mean, how could something be so interesting that you would be sitting on the edge of your seat for 5 hours? Plus, you're an extraordinarily entertaining presenter in that way. I mean, you are humorous and you just, you speak to people
Thank you.
So yeah, so
Thank you.
you
Well, it
guys,
was fun to see you there because you had come to my tour that I did in 2017,
yeah.
which was basically on the role of fascia and healthy movement.
Oh, that
And
was
that one
so
went
good.
for about 4 hours, I think. This one was about 5 hours, 15 minutes. And yeah, I put out a lot of energy to keep people at the edge of their seats for that long because people will be like, "Oh, what are we gonna do here for that long?" And I'd be like, "Okay, you can now have an 8 minute break." Like 8 minute break? Like, yeah, I got to keep going. Then 2 hours later, I give you another 8 minute break, and you're like, another 8 minutes.
So what's next on your, on your plans for yourself and your studies?
um, Other than my lab time for the classes that I teach, to just work on a project that I'm going to call Sex and the Sacred Heart.
Oh my goodness, that sounds wonderful.
That was a project that I actually initiated back in 2019. I had a friend ask me to give a keynote talk at her conference in Berlin. And so I went out to Berlin in January 2020 with this talk called Sex and the Sacred Heart. And I basically wanted to just talk about, you know, pelvic anatomy, sex anatomy. People don't get a frank discussion of sex much anywhere. So I give a very frank discussion from very, anatomically informed, help people understand sex physiology and anatomy. But I didn't want it to just be cut off from the heart. A heart isn't inside your chest. Your heart is centered inside your chest. Inside your chest is your heart center, and it expands from there, right, into every nook and cranny of your body. There's no place where it isn't. And so to see that visually, to demonstrate that, through video and imagery over the process of its revelation, I feel will be instructive and help to ground people's sense of their whole heartedness and the extraordinary sacredness of that of that that center of ourselves.
Mhm. We need that yesterday.
We do need yesterday. Well, I feel like I have a lot of work to do personally to deliver that message in a way that's so deeply personal that no one can escape the impact of the transmission, in a sense, right? In other words, I don't want to just go give an anatomy talk. I want to invite people to their own self-connection. And so that makes it incumbent upon me to be deeply connected in the process that I undertake to tell the story, and also in my own development as a person. I mean, I basically got to put myself on the spot, right? To take myself further in my own interconnectedness so that when I speak to it, it's conveyed. Otherwise, I'm just blowing smoke up
Right.
girl's ass. You know what I'm saying?
That's the beauty of teaching. You have to live it yourself first before you can teach it. And so you take yourself to new places in order to have other people.
Yeah, hopefully.
That you
Otherwise,
will.
if I'm a disconnected person talking about connection,
You're
the
not.
irony is too brutal to go forward.
You're not. So, you offer certain types of memberships to your organization. How does that work?
Well, I am definitely on a mission to both transform the way people see the body and to invite them into deeper connection with themselves. And so my website is like the most accessible thing I could invent, to give people that opportunity to learn with me and to share with folks what I'm offering. And so, I had originally just been teaching these dissection workshops, and they're expensive. It costs a lot of money to go to a laboratory, spend a week away from home, etc. And it's a very expensive course to produce, and so the cost of it is high. And I was like, people can't do that. And so I produced a DVD series, and that way people could not have to go to the lab. They could, for whatever, $160 I sold my 4 feature-length DVDs for, people could watch that. Well, then I realized, it's really expensive to do that, and so I put them on YouTube, just for free, and created a YouTube channel as an access point. But I want to go deeper, but I also want to protect the content. I don't like YouTube as a place for my donors, and they're constantly getting the gray screen. You got to be 18-year-olds or older. They're constantly doing community standards because they have computers with algorithms that seek out naked bodies and then say, you got to be 18 or older, look at it, and the algorithm has no idea that this is legitimate, beautiful, sacred anatomy with donors' gay bodies. So there's no person behind these judgments. It's just the system blocks me. And so I wanted to have a container for my offerings, which is the website. And then, so I have and it's free, so you just go on my website and cruise around and not be a member, and you'll find videos and images and galleries and writings, all kinds of things. But if you join as a free member, I call it my Easy Rider membership. You're a 70s girl, aren't you? So, Easy Rider, right? So Easy Rider membership is free, and I have over 20 hours of content there. My Integral Anatomy series, as well as something called the Integral Anatomy Intensive. That was a tour that I did before the tour that you saw in 2017. And so those events and productions are all in that free membership, which give you a beautiful arc. You can learn integral anatomy just from looking at that and get the basic concept down from those 20 hours, and that's free and protected on the site. And then I have a paid membership that's $15 a month. I have about 330 hours of visual content on there now, plus all of my books, all of my articles.
Well, I do want to say that, I did take your dissection workshop at one time, and it was one of the most sacred experiences of my life, and life-changing. You made it a sacred space, and had so much respect and love for the donor, and we learned so much from her donation of her body. And I felt, there was a spiritual thing about that. It's not just physical. You realize that we are spiritual beings, kind of living in this body.
Bodily lives, yeah.
Yeah. So I really love that. And if somebody wants to, what are the qualifications that someone needs to have if they wanted to take a basic dissection workshop?
I have an application on my site. And the purpose of the application is not so that I weed people out, but so that people weed themselves out. So to me, it's all about whether you're on board for the kind of experience that I'm offering and can be a meaningful community member for the course of the week, then some kind of pedigree in anatomical knowledge, because all of that's going out the window by day 2. In other words, you can try and cling to your illusions for as long as you like, but at some point during the course of that week, it's going to be broken.
Fantastic. I love that. So we're probably going to close up right now, but what I would like you to do, if you will, is to share some words of wisdom that you might have for young people today.
for young people. It's going to be all right. And your attention has been commodified, and it's your most precious asset is your attention. So what you're paying attention to is biologically active and transforming you. So be careful about what you pay attention to, and treat your attention as a precious gift and a treasure that you can spend where you will, and do so in a way that serves you and your community, as opposed to those who would take advantage of your attention.
Mm. That's so beautiful. That's not only for young people, that's for old people too. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gil, for your time and for being here today. I feel it's such an honor to have this opportunity to talk to you.
It's my honor, Lane. I love you. It's so fun to chat with you, and I appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Thank you, Gil. Love you too.